mention the word Ariel in mixed company, and reactions will range from those who imagine photographs taken from a plane, to those who think of the great Bard of Avon, William Shakespeare's ethereal spirit of the same name from The Tempest. However, bring Ariel into the conversation at a classic British motorcycle rally and you'll get a very different response. Everyone will have a story to tell about the legendary Ariel motorcycles of the industry's golden age, as Square 4s, Red Hunters, Huntmasters, and even the Leader are fondly reminisced over for as long as anyone has the time to listen. The last official Ariels to roll off the production line did so in the late 1960s, and although the company has long since been consigned to the pages of the history books, one thing is absolutely for certain: Ariel motorcycles will never be forgotten. To begin at the beginning, this fascinating journey in search of the Ariel story takes us back more than a century in time, to the Birmingham Midlands, where the Industrial Revolution had transformed the once rural countryside into a manufacturing metropolis. Throughout Europe, towards the end of the 19th century, a new craze was bringing about one of the most important phases of social change the world has ever known. Today, the humble bicycle is definitely taken for granted, but when the first bicycles appeared in the 1870s, it revolutionised transport history. Far more economical than horses, people could not only travel to take advantage of more distant employment and educational opportunities, they could also ride their bicycles for sheer pleasure rather than purpose. In Victorian Britain, the spirit of the entrepreneur reigned supreme, and bicycle factories sprang up in abundance to service the new craze, particularly in the industrial heartland of the Midlands. Like so many of the great British motorcycle manufacturers, Ariel started life making bicycles. Founded by James Starley and William Hillman, who would later progress to four-wheeled transportation, the Ariel Bicycle Company, based in Birmingham's Sellyoak district, was bought by Cycle Components in 1898. The Ariel name was first used for a Didion-powered tricycle that they had been developing, moving on to a two-wheeled machine with a Kerry engine by the time Queen Victoria had passed away in 1901. It was the dawn of a new era as Edward VII came to the British throne, and the staid respectability of Victorian England gave way to a freedom of spirit that the burgeoning motorcycle industry typified. This 1909 Triumph Roadster is an early example of the type of motorcycle that was in production, and at Ariel, progress was equally as rapid. Charles Sangster, a fine engineer in his own right, bought Ariel and transformed it into a family concern. But as the years of the new century passed, the threat of World War increased. For all of the British motorcycle manufacturers, World War I in 1914 called a halt to the proceedings. BSA, the Birmingham Small Arms Company, had started out manufacturing weapons for the Crimean War, and as well as returning to the production of ordnance for the war effort, they also made military machines. Triumph did the same as did Ariel, and as armistice was called on the 11th hour, of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, they had certainly done their bit for king and country. Some of the biggest pre-World War I British motorcycle manufacturers failed to secure military contracts, and Rex, who were known as the King of Motorcycles, numbered amongst them. The company struggled to survive in the post-war years, and in the 1930s production ceased and this great British motorcycle mark was lost forever. Ariel continued to build motorcycles, and as we take a close-up and personal look at a fine machine from 1926, we can open up the next chapter in the company's development. In 1925, Ariel recruited an inspired young designer by the name of Val Page, who had previously been very successful with JAP. With its flat tank, this 500cc Ariel, which was manufactured the year after Val Page took up his post, looks very similar to all the Ariels to date, but the engine was a very different proposition. Page's elegantly simple overhead valve design was the last word in progress, but it was going to take another year before the frame and the cycle parts were able to catch up. This 500cc Ariel has been lovingly restored by its present owner over a period of 21 years. Quite incredibly, he took it home as a pile of parts in a wheelbarrow, and as you can see for yourself, has quite literally breathed new life into it. To the uninitiated, this may seem a Herculean task, but one of the great attractions of the classic Ariels is the straightforward design, making repair and restoration not too much of a headache. Also, many of the problems that can arise while these machines are being ridden will be completely fixable by the roadside. It's a theory that this 1926 Ariel is a testament to, as it has just completed a charity run to Berlin without so much as a cough or splutter, proving that Val Page's innovative design not only served the motorcyclist of the 1920s, but has also stood the test of time. Great progress was made at Ariel in a very short space of time, and this next motorcycle, a 557cc side valve from 1928, is a perfect example of the impact Val Page had on the company. The first and most obvious difference to the previous motorcycle is the new saddle tank rather than the flat version. At last, the frame had caught up with the state-of-the-art engine, and with more powerful brakes to complete the picture, Ariel had a product that they could be truly proud of. In fact, the advertising material had a new slogan: Ariel, the modern motorcycle, which this machine unquestionably lived up to. This particular motorcycle has been in the safe custody of its present owner since 1969, and it has a very special place in his affections because it's the first vintage bike that he acquired. Evidently, collecting the classics is totally addictive, and this Ariel, with the benefit of hindsight, was an excellent place to start. Since those early days, he's developed an interest in the very early models of all manufacturers, and his collection of classic motorcycles is likely to continue growing for as long as there are machines to be rescued from scrapyards, garages and garden sheds, the length and breadth of the nation. Returning to the Ariel story, while this model was in production, there were dramatic changes at the Selly-Oak factory. Then, just as in 1914, world events took a hand in shaping Ariel's future. The Roaring Twenties finished with the catastrophic Wall Street crash, and the repercussions of the resulting depression reached far and wide, and the industrial manufacturers of Birmingham went into a decline just like the rest of the world. The Sangster family firm at Ariel had a fine new leader in Jack, son of Charles, who had bought the company back in 1902. As the depression hit hard and Ariel was facing liquidation, Jack Sangster closed the company down for a short time in order to restructure the operation. While machines like this fine 1929 Ariel B flew the flag for Ariel out on the highways and byways of Great Britain, Sangster bought all the machinery for next to nothing, rehired the cream of Ariel staff, and opened a new plant just 500 yards down the road from the old factory. Jack Sangster poured all of his personal fortune into the venture, and the new company name was very appropriately Ariel Works JS Limited. It was during this rebirth of Ariel that another hunch played by Jack Sangster really paid off. A South London motorcycle dealer had come up with a design for a particularly compact 4-cylinder engine by mounting the cylinders 2 by 2. His working drawings were jotted down on the back of a cigarette packet, wild woodbines of course, and when he took the idea to Jack Sangster, the Ariel boss installed him in an office to expand on his etchings, even going as far as appointing an assistant draftsman to help with the detail. The cigarette packet sketcher was none other than Edward Turner, his assistant Bert Hopwood, and the resulting motorcycle was the Ariel Square 4. Having the legacy of Val Page's earlier designs combined with the talent of Edward Turner and Bert Hopwood, the new restructured Ariel rose phoenix-like from the ashes of the Depression. The next motorcycle we are featuring is a 1932 500cc Red Hunter, and is a perfect example of the new generation of Ariel machines. Although the impressively elegant engine is pure Val Page, it was Edward Turner who was responsible for the distinctive red and chrome tank that gave this bike its name. Today, as brightly coloured motorcycles of every hue and cry are available, this may not seem terribly significant. However, back in the 1930s, motorcycles tended to come in black, or black, just like Henry Ford's motorcars. This 500cc Red Hunter was definitely top of the range, along with the 250cc and 350cc versions. In the model you're looking at, there were 2 pistons. The 7:1 ratio piston was for road use, giving 28 brake horsepower, while the alternative high compression piston was for racing, giving the Red Hunter a maximum speed in excess of 90 miles per hour. When it came to trials and scrambles, the Red Hunter was undoubtedly in a class of its own, and building upon this success, special trials versions of the Red Hunter were built with higher ground clearance frames. In a short time span, thanks to the Square 4s and the Red Hunters, Jack Sangster's efforts were rewarded, and when this advertisement was drafted in 1935, Ariel was a market force to be reckoned with. The 500cc Red Hunter, acclaimed by all as being the outstanding sports machine of 1934, is better than ever for 1935. Capable of being tuned to speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, it places no limit to the scope of the enthusiastic tuner and rider. The new long-stroke engine is now offered with a twin-port head or with a single-port head without extra charge. The fins, which in conjunction with the improved finning of the nickel-chrome iron cylinder barrel, give increased conductivity and longer wear. The massive crankcase and flywheel assembly are designed to withstand still higher maximum speeds and inertia loads. But just as Ariel was getting back into the swing of things, the storm clouds of war were gathering over Europe, as Adolf Hitler became an ever-increasing menace. When Neville Chamberlain announced to the nation on that fateful September Sunday morning in 1939 that Britain was at war with Germany, the motorcycle manufacturers of the Midlands were ready and waiting with machines for the war effort. What we are looking at here is an Ariel W/NG 350cc that was, in effect, a detuned Red Hunter fitted into an Ariel Trials frame. But the story of this machine began some 4 years before the outbreak of World War II. In 1935, the British War Office, ever watchful of German aggression in Europe, held a series of tests to select the most suitable civilian motorcycles for military use in the event of war. The assessment took 6 months and included a 10,000-mile test in street and off-road conditions. There was a 5,000-mile checkup and a full stripped-down inspection at the conclusion, and 7 manufacturers — Ariel, BSA, Matchless, New Imperial, Norton, Royal Enfield and Triumph — participated in the proceedings. Unfortunately, the model of Ariel that was tested was due to be replaced, and although it did extremely well in cross-country conditions, the War Office dropped it from the testing. In 1936, Ariel attempted to interest the War Office in the 600cc and 1000cc square fours, but both were rejected due to excessive weight. A month before war broke out, Ariel offered a 497cc overhead valve and a side valve of the same engine capacity to be evaluated against the War Office's Norton 16H, but it was a new prototype, the W/NG, that came out in 1940, which proved to be the best of the bunch. Nevertheless, the War Office was far from impressed with this 350cc overhead valve single based on a winning trials bike, describing it as merely fair for use only in emergency purposes. Ironically, the French government immediately placed an order, and it was events in that nation's port of Dunkirk in 1940 that changed the British War Office's thinking. As Adolf Hitler stormed through the Low Countries and France as he prepared to take Paris, thousands of Allied troops, most notably the British Expeditionary Force, were caught in a Nazi trap and forced towards the sea at Dunkirk. Just when it looked like all hope was lost, the British Navy and a flotilla of assorted civilian craft snatched more than 300,000 men from the beaches of Dunkirk and returned them safely to the south coast of England. Prime Minister Winston Churchill described this as a miracle of deliverance, but the same could not be said of the military hardware and ordnance left abandoned on the country roads of France. Suddenly, the War Office was not in a position to pick and choose. They needed every motorcycle they could lay their hands on, and Ariel's wartime effort went into overdrive, even supplying used Ariels in good working order. The War Department, which was the Army, Air Ministry, the RAF, the Admiralty Department, the Navy, Ministry of Agriculture, and Women's Land Army all used Ariels, just like the one you see here. The W-NG models supplied during the war years had various unique features. Dual toolboxes were standard, likewise pannier frames, bags, rear carrying rack, and headlamp mask. Between 1942 and 43, rubber items on bikes were discontinued because of a shortage of raw materials, and canvas was used for hand grips. Footrests were cast in steel, while a solid clamp replaced the rubber handlebar mounts. On the later models, aluminium alloy was conserved at all costs, as a pressed steel primary chain case and timing cover were used. Despite the hardships of war and the extreme levels of hard work required to keep Ariel going, the company took their wartime duties very seriously indeed, proudly announcing that they were on top of their job, in a special wartime advertisement that epitomised the mood of the entire nation. Success must inevitably follow the whole energies of an individual or organisation directed towards getting on top of the job. Ariel has always enjoyed a reputation for reliability and dependability, a reputation which is only enhanced by the extensive experience in building wartime machines. The stern task of producing Ariels to stand up to the heavy duties of war's demands has been accompanied by sound development, resulting in even better machines to grace a better era. But Ariel were not the only company kept busy with the war effort, and BSA, their near neighbours, expanded business even further after becoming the largest motorcycle company in the world in the years between the two wars. Val Page had joined BSA in the 1930s and had designed the magnificent Empire Star that evolved into the company's piece de resistance, the Gold Star, adding another design classic to his list of achievements. With their sights set on further Ariel acquisition, BSA bought the whole company in 1944, and as peace was restored to Britain's shores in 1945, the wind of change swept through Ariel once more, just as it did through the British motorcycle industry as a whole. Fortunately for all concerned, BSA continued to produce Ariel machines in their own right, and quite naturally, as civilian production restarted, the pre-war Ariel models were again available. There were 350 and 500cc machines on offer, either in deluxe or Red Hunter livery, alongside a 600cc side valve sidecar model and the 1000cc Square 4. This is a 1946 500cc Red Hunter that was extremely popular as the people of Britain attempted to rebuild their lives. Interestingly, the main difference between this Red Hunter and the pre-war model was the addition of telescopic front forks from 1946 onwards, a design feature that was indeed used throughout the BSA range as well, right through to the late 1960s. Stepping back in time to post-World War II Britain, the lucky first owner of this Ariel would have needed in the region of £150 to purchase a Red Hunter straight off the production line. The publicity information claimed great things for the 1946 Red Hunter, including a top speed in excess of 85 miles per hour. However, just because the war was over, rationing didn't immediately stop, and for a while, things were worse than they had been during the conflict. Petrol actually stayed on ration until 1950, so fuel consumption was pretty important to the motorist, whether on two wheels or four, and the Red Hunter could be as economical as the next bike. If you rode at 30 miles an hour, it was possible to get over 100 miles to the gallon, but an increase in speed to 60 miles an hour would result in a drop to 53 miles to the gallon. Needless to say, with a motorcycle as sleek and sporty as this Red Hunter, speed would win over economy every time. A very important part of the British motorcycle industry concentrated on competition machines, and works riders vied for the top places in road races like the Isle of Man TT, as well as time trials, scrambling, and even sidecar racing. One of the most successful aerial works riders was Sammy Miller, and his consistent success on a 500cc Trials Mount Red Hunter certainly kept this versatile motorcycle in the headlines and ensured it was a top-selling machine. The Red Hunter was in production for an incredible number of years, from our first example of 1932 until 1959, spanning one of the most significant periods in British history. There were few modifications made over the years, which can only mean that mechanical problems were minimal and the bike continued to be popular with the general public. To keep in step with developing trends, however, as we've already seen, telescopic forks were incorporated into the design, as was total valve gear enclosure. There was no great secret to the Ariel Red Hunter's success. The design was straightforward, the construction robust, and within its class it gave an all-round satisfactory performance. Starting the Red Hunter was not a problem, and only in exceptionally cold conditions did the rider need to lightly flood the carburetor to fire the engine. Once out on the road, engine noise was minimal and the low-speed torque was particularly good, along with transmission smoothness that was one of the Red Hunter's best features. Acceleration, whether solo or with a sidecar fitted, was always brisk and positive, with smooth gear changing and a light-to-operate clutch. The riding position is not only extremely comfortable, but well designed to give the rider maximum control, whether at full speed on a dual carriageway or a steady crawl through a traffic jam. Over 3 decades, the Red Hunter proved hugely popular, and as the parent company BSA made staggering profits, the Ariel name continued to thrill a whole new generation of motorcyclists as rock and roll, Hollywood, and James Dean turned everyday two-wheeled transport into the cool, chic freedom symbol of the 1950s. When you consider the names of many of the top-selling motorcycles of the 50s, you can very quickly gauge the mood of the moment, with bullets, Tigers, Dominators, and even a super rocket. Speed and power were key for any manufacturer. When it came to sales, Ariel's contribution to the arena was the Huntmaster, of which you can see a fine 1956 650cc specimen before you now. These were exciting times. BSA was a major player in the motorcycle industry, and Ariel was tucked comfortably under the bigger company's protective wing. Very significantly, Val Page was at BSA and again had a part to play in Ariel design, some 30 years after his earlier creation of the modern Ariel motorcycle. The first Huntmasters rolled off the production line in 1954, and some would say that the customer really did get the best of both worlds. The stylish Ariel frame was fitted with an engine based on the BSA 650A10, and the resulting combination attracted favourable reviews. The Motorcycle magazine had not been able to road test the Huntmaster in auspicious circumstances, but they nevertheless substantiated Ariel's claim that this machine could reach speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour. It was psychologically crucial to the 1950s biker to be able to achieve this landmark speed, and the reviewer reported the following result. Under poor conditions and the rider wearing bulky clothing, a speed of 96 miles per hour was reached. Evidently, this was enough, and the Huntmaster, with its sleek good look, sold well, and what's more, as this 1956 model testifies, is more than capable of standing the test of time. This classic 1956 Huntmaster was purchased by its present owner from a member of the Ariel Owners Club in full running order some 10 years ago. The 650cc engine has actually been modified, and a Huntmaster of 1954 vintage supplied the tank and mudguards. The Ariel Owners Motorcycle Club is one of the best of the classic motorcycle groups, and its history dates back to the era of the Huntmaster. In the same year that the Ariel Huntmaster made its debut, an American band known as Bill Haley and the Comets recorded a catchy little number called Rock Around the Clock. It was the birth of rock and roll and the advent of the teenager, much to the horror of the older generation, who considered such goings-on a threat to the fabric of society. Radio stations were banned from playing rock and roll, but a relatively new phenomenon benefited greatly from this embargo. As the post-World War II road network in Great Britain improved, transport cafes began to appear at strategic points on busy roads. For the motorcyclists of the 1950s, predominantly young men inspired by the shock of the new, the transport cafes were great places to meet up, especially as they were equipped with jukeboxes that played rock and roll. Many motorcycle organisations began life in these transport cafes, and the Ariel Owners Motorcycle Club, being no exception, was formed in the world-famous Ace Cafe on London's North Circular at 3 p.m. on Saturday the 24th of November 1951. To this day, the club exists to provide Ariel enthusiasts with an opportunity to meet and discuss motorcycling matters, and to foster friendships between members, an aim that is achieved very successfully indeed. The cafe culture gave rise to some remarkable motorcycle races, literally over distances between designated cafes, and even the alarming sport of record racing. This involved dropping a coin in the jukebox slot and racing to a given point and back before the record finished. Huntmasters would no doubt have been ridden in just such events, but needless to say, such activities were frowned upon by those who had deemed it necessary to ban rock and roll. This was, however, a relatively short-lived phenomenon over a 20-year period, because by the end of the 1960s, the motorway network in Britain had grown, with shiny new service stations to replace transport cafes for the family motorists who favoured four wheels rather than two. Looking at this very respectable classic collector's Huntmaster motorcycle today, it's hard to believe that it would have been a favourite with the black leather-clad ton-up boys of the 1950s. Yet, if you consider the technical spec of its day, all is made clear. The 650cc engine was of the overhead valve variety, with cast iron cylinders and head. Mounted on heavy-duty roller and white metal-lined bearings with a forged steel crankshaft, with the added convenience of a gear-driven camshaft with pushrod-operated overhead valves, and a state-of-the-art Amel monoblock carburetor with air cleaner. When it came to the frame, the Huntmaster was fully triangulated to ensure maximum rigidity with swinging arm rear suspension. Also, there was a thief-proof steering lock, something taken for granted on modern machines, but a veritable innovation back in 1956, when this Huntmaster would have been a very desirable motorcycle indeed. This was in fact the epitome of style on two wheels, and the telescopic front forks with hydraulic dampening look positively contemporary. Not that appearance was everything for the Huntmaster. Some applications were first and foremost functional, and in the case of the powerful central brakes with non-fade linings, this was just as well, because stopping on a sixpence, as the expression goes, was vital for a classic ton-up motorcycle. Despite its popularity, the Huntmaster was discontinued in 1958, when the decision was taken across the board to cease production of all Ariel four-strokes. The wind of change was again blowing through the British motorcycle industry, and the small family concerns that had been so key to development and diversity disappeared without trace. It was the age of the corporate giant, as BSA now owned Triumph alongside Ariel, and the main competition came from Associated Motorcycles, or AMC, as the amalgamation of AJS, Matchless, Francis Barnett, James, and even the mighty Norton were known. The 1960s were just a rev count away, but as the boardrooms of the British motorcycle industry filled with fat cats who had no interest whatsoever in the nuts and bolts of the business, their Japanese competitors capitalised on every opportunity. The likes of Yamaha and Suzuki moved with the technological times and came up with machines that were not only extremely user-friendly, but also very reasonably priced. The British motorcycle moguls failed to appreciate the danger, believing that what was good enough for the past was perfectly adequate for the future. In 1957, Donald Heather, the director of Norton, uttered these immortal words. "Most motorcyclists love to spend their Sunday mornings taking off the cylinder head and reseating the valves." Heather couldn't have been more wrong, and sadly he was not alone in his opinion, because it was shared by the industry's top brass. It really was the beginning of the end for the majority of British classics, but at Ariel they still had a secret weapon. Val Page was as in touch with motorcycle innovation as he had ever been, and although by now he was well past retirement age, he had another plan on the drawing board. When Val Page and the design team were allocated the brief for the motorcycle that would become the leader, it said that they were given a completely free hand to produce an ultra-modern machine with built-in weather protection using a two-stroke 250cc engine. The project was 3 years in development, and when the leader was eventually unveiled, it was without doubt a design classic. But what the British motorcycling fraternity would make of it remained to be seen. The leader that you're watching being put through its paces is actually of a 1961 vintage and is much treasured by its owner, who rescued it from a breaker's yard more than 28 years ago. Always a keen motorcyclist, he was on the hunt for a part for an ailing BSA Bantam when he spotted the leader, then decked out in enough psychedelic orange paint to trigger hallucinations. Having coveted a friend's leader for some considerable time, he rose to the restoration challenge and gave this design classic a good home and a more sympathetic colour scheme. Over the years, the straightforward design and user-friendly engineering has meant that 40 plus years on, this leader is still out and about, touring as far afield as Scotland, providing this collector with hours of pleasure and immense satisfaction in a job well done. To create the leader, Ariel used steel pressings, basing the design upon a rigid boxed beam from which the engine unit was suspended at 2 points, with a rear engine mounting also acting as a pivot for the rear fork. The fuel tank is self-contained and tucked away to the rear in the frame beam, in the optimum position for road handling. To fuel it up, the dual seat lifts to reveal the filler cap, and ingeniously, the pressed dummy petrol tank between the rider's knees is actually a very roomy luggage compartment. Further pressings included leg shields, headlamp cowl and tail unit. To complete the design, detachable side panels kept the engine and gearbox unit completely hidden from view. The 250cc twin two-stroke engine had the cylinders inclined forward at 45 degrees, with light alloy pressure die-cast cylinder heads and part spherical combustion chambers. Despite the gearbox shell being cast integrally with the crankcase, the gears and shafts were manufactured by another company. Talks went on with Velocet to use the same gearbox internals as their 250cc machine, but the project didn't materialise. Even the fork design was revolutionary, using hydraulically dampened spring units concealed in the fork leg pressings, with heat-treated light alloy die-cast trailing links that were arranged so that the wheelbase remained constant, which Ariel claimed resulted in minimal tyre wear. Of the standard fittings, the large windscreen and pressed steel instrument panel gave the leader a unique appearance, and the range of optional extras, including a cast light alloy rear carrier, direction indicator lamps, styled in pannier cases, and chromium-plated rear bumper spelt out 1960 style with a capital S. This was a radical departure for Ariel, especially as the tooling up costs were huge for something so completely different to anything that had been produced before. Ariel needed a high volume of sales from the leader to justify the manufacturing costs, and with The Motorcycle magazine describing this development as a bold bid for economic suicide, Val Page's brave new motorcycle had a great deal to prove. In Great Britain, the leader sold well, but when it came to the all-important export market to the USA, this was one leader that nobody wanted to follow. The Americans had enjoyed something of a love affair with British motorcycles through the 1950s, with such legendary Hollywood heroes as Marlon Brando and James Dean seen astride their respective mighty triumphs, and there was all to play for. The British evidently appreciated the style, economy and practicality of the Leader, but for the Americans this was no rebel with or without a cause, and it was not to be countenanced at any price. Disappointed, Ariel went back to the drawing board and in 1960 came up with the Arrow, a second two-stroke twin, retaining the main pressings of the Leader, whilst discarding the inbuilt leg shields, dashboard and windscreen. On the same theme, a third variant called the Sports Arrow shot onto the market in 1961, with an improved size inlet tract and Amel monoblock carburettor. Plenty of chromium plating was added to the engine, side cover, front fork link cover plates and toolbox lid. Customers in Britain responded very favourably, but the Americans were still unimpressed, refusing to consider a pressed steel frame motorcycle in whatever guise it was presented to them. The Ariel Leader may not have been the sales success that the company needed for their long-term survival, but it certainly wasn't the economic suicide that had been predicted. Those customers who had bought Leaders were delighted with them, and a genuine independent road test from 1958 had few complaints and plenty of praise for this groundbreaking machine. On long journeys, it was found that the incredible luggage capacity was very useful, and the weather protection meant that normal clothing could be worn rather than bulky motorcycle gear, which was particularly good for those using the Leader for the commute to work. Both riders and passengers singled out the deeply padded dual seat for special praise, and the riding position was deemed to be very comfortable. Despite the practical attributes of the Leader, the performance was anything but dull, with a top speed in excess of 70 miles per hour, and for those who purchased the later Arrow, it could certainly fly. Tuned versions of the Arrow soon appeared on the home racing circuits and in the famous Isle of Man TT races, producing some of the best results by a British manufacturer in the 250cc class for many years. The Leader proved to be Val Page's final design in production at Ariel, because although he was engaged to work on a Super Ariel with a straight 4 engine to target an army contract, the project was abandoned. The government of the day ordered a massive cutback in military spending as Britain settled comfortably into peacetime, and Val Page finally settled into a well-earned retirement. With the loss of this hoped-for contract and the sales of the Leader proving insufficient to save the day, the Ariel works at Selly Oak were closed in 1963, and all production transferred to BSA's Small Heath plant. Effectively, this was the end of the road for Ariel, and as the Japanese competition made deeper and deeper inroads into the British motorcycle market, it wasn't only Ariel struggling to survive. Even their parent company, BSA, was seeing the massive profits of their glory days fall into a decline. Along with AMC, their main homegrown competition, BSA, with Ariel in tow, needed to invest, innovate and match Japanese value for money if the British motorcycle industry stood any chance of survival. But it was not to be. The boardrooms were packed with greedy shareholders and entrepreneurs who had no interest in or understanding of the glorious motorcycle heritage they were destroying. as BSA attempted to streamline their operation, the decision was taken to axe aerial production altogether in 1965. However, the Ariel name did come briefly out of retirement in 1970 when BSA launched the Ariel 3. This was a peculiar three-wheeled contraption that was hinged so that it would tilt around corners. A cross between a moped and a tricycle, the Ariel 3 was a complete and unmitigated disaster, which cost a great deal to produce and could well have been the final nail in the BSA coffin. Of all BSA's assets, only the Triumph name proved to be destined for survival. AMC went bankrupt in the mid-1960s and was taken over by Manganese Bronze Holdings to form Norton Villiers. After the Ariel 3 debauch, BSA were absorbed into this conglomerate in 1971 to become Norton Villiers Triumph. However, by 1973, the distinguished Birmingham Small Arms Company ceased production, following on where Ariel had gone before. Yet, as this programme draws to a close, and it sounds like nothing but doom and gloom, it's worth remembering that a thing of beauty is a joy forever. And in the case of classic Ariel motorcycles, never a truer word was spoken. Thanks to the hard work and dedication of our Ariel enthusiasts, we've been privileged to see an entire range of these fine old machines, both up close and personal, and out on the open road. To quote another witticism on beauty, albeit referring to the female of the species, a girl can take no credit for beauty at 16, but if she is beautiful at 60, it will be her soul's doing. Evidently, Ariel motorcycles are packed full of soul, and for as long as there are organisations like the Ariel Owners Motorcycle Club and enthusiasts ready, willing and able to bring these two-wheeled treasures of the past back to life, the spirit of Ariel will never die.